If you do a Google search for best keyboard for women, the top result is a Digital Trends article written by a man, suggesting various ergonomic keyboards.
If you search within the article for the word women, you get 0 results. The only photo on the page is of a man's hands using a strangely shaped keyboard. These are clearly keyboards designed for a purpose, but that purpose is not to suit the needs of female computer users. Keyboards are likely designed by men with men in mind. Why Google thinks this is an article about keyboards designed for women is anybody's guess, but other Google results are no better. A search for the best keyboards for long nails returns similar results. The top result is an article written by a man about how long nails can be problematic while typing, and then goes on to suggest a bunch of keyboards not specifically built to women's needs. It's safe to assume they were all designed by men for men, and any advantage women might find in their use is coincidental rather than intentional. Towards the end of the article, the male author says that posture, position, and practice are the only way to comfortably type with long nails. In other words, the user has to accommodate the design rather than the design fitting the needs of the user. Gendered design is a contentious subject for various reasons. There are lots of pointlessly gendered products that are simply products designed for men but with a pink coat of paint on top, and usually an extra uptick in the price tag, fittingly known as the pink tax. Though it's worth noting that the pink tax applies more generally to any products aimed at women, not just the pink ones. Many products that are supposedly one-size-fits-all are really one-size-fits-all men, and often that isn't even the case. After all, not all men are massively tall people with huge hands and a homogeneous sense of aesthetic or universal set of needs. Accommodation for different needs in design is often known as inclusive or feminist design, not because it places women's needs ahead of anyone else's, but because it promotes equity and fair design practices for the needs of all people, not just men. Feminist design seeks to level the playing field and inspire empathy and inclusion for people who don't fit a singular, biologically masculine, male-gendered mold. The biological binary definition of gender doesn't come close to doing justice to the needs of all people of every gender variation everywhere, but even designing equitably for the 2 biological genders would be a good start. Now, some argue that designing nuanced variations on every product is unnecessary when a single product of universal design will fill many needs. I mentioned already that one-size-fits-all is usually intended for male use, but there are additional factors working against the concept of universal design. For one thing, it's often quite bland, aesthetically boring. The goal of designing to not displease anyone often results in a design that doesn't especially please anyone either. Beyond aesthetics, these universal designs are simply not capable of meeting the needs of a universal audience. They meet some of the needs of one group and some of the needs of another without truly being great for anyone. There are obviously some exceptions, some products that don't need to be designed for every gender. Most biological women would have no use for jock straps or an athletic cup, for example. It would be fairly pointless to design something like tampons for males who lack a menstrual cycle. However, tampons are a good example of why designing for different needs and preferences can be an equitable, inclusive, successful design and business practice. There are at least 5 different sizes of tampons, and between brands there are differences in absorbency. This variation allows for selection based on personal need. There are at least 5 different applicator types or ways of inserting the tampon based primarily on preference. They also come in different scents and colors, but tampons are also not the only type of menstrual product. There are pads, menstrual cups, discs, panties, sponges, and possibly other solutions, and each of those comes in different form factors as well. These are products designed solely for women, and yet there is a wide variety to choose from, based on the nuanced needs and preferences of different users. Obviously, a tampon is quite a bit less complex to design and develop than something like a keyboard or television, but there are also many different types of keyboards and TVs, multiple competing businesses producing them, and few, if any, are designed beyond some principles of universal design. The problem is almost no design is aimed specifically at women's needs unless it's something that is explicitly made for women because it's something only women will use. Even then, products are sometimes made by men with men's biases and assumptions, despite designing products aimed at a female target audience. Sometimes sexist business practices are at the root of these problems. Business people, often men, decide that a product designed explicitly to meet women's needs or the needs of anyone other than males isn't going to do well on the market, or that costs can be cut and no one will complain with their wallets. People will buy the product anyway. For example, pants designed for women with pockets that are effectively superficial. Some people point to the adherence of male fashion designers in a male-driven fashion industry to sexist feminine ideals for clothing to fit tightly to the body and pockets being eliminated for interrupting that aesthetic. Male clothing designers making choices for female clothing wearers is undoubtedly a problem, but in this particular case, it's also likely a matter of cost cutting. Reducing the size of pockets or eliminating them altogether can supposedly save clothing makers a lot of money, and women will still buy their pants anyway because A, they need pants, and B, they have limited options. So despite there being a large online presence of women demanding pockets, and despite the fact that at least some of those women refuse to purchase clothing without functional pockets, fashion designers are still successfully producing pants designed for women to be aesthetically pleasing but effectively non-functional.
There are a plethora of other equally absurd inequalities in design, some of them minor, others potentially life-threatening. What is the answer? It's complicated, in that it takes a lot of people making good choices in many places of power and in many different industries, but it's a relatively simple solution. It takes people willing to put feminist design theory into practice, to consider things from another perspective than their own, to move beyond their own biases and utilize user-centered design to figure out what people really want and, more importantly, what they need. It requires a shift away from male hegemonic design practices into modernity, into a place where there's more than one gender, more than one human form factor, more than one set of universal needs. Some industries produce pointlessly gendered products to generate more revenue, while others neglect necessary changes for the accommodation of a variety of users' needs, even when it could produce revenue, and they fail to do so out of adherence to gendered biases, in the name of universal design, or out of oppressive, hegemonically masculine ideals.